What I'm going to do tonight is go over some tracts. I've replaced 31 of the 32 tracts that were out there in the tract rack. Some of those tracts we've seen before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those, but some of them we haven't seen before. The one I did not replace went so well with the lesson this morning, is One Church as Good as Another, that I left that tract out there. It's down there in the far corner, and so that tract is there for you to review, and it sort of went along with my lesson so well this morning. There is something else I wanted to say before I got into these tracts. I usually go to the Webb House every Sunday afternoon, and Laurie says, listen, that's pure religion and undefiled, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. Well, those people, they need to hear from the Bible too. And it's such a joy to be with them. But after I visited my parents, went to the Webb House, I went to East End and heard 2 of the 6 young men that they have speaking today in a mini lectureship. These young men come from the East Tennessee School of Preaching and Biblical Studies. Now, Steve Higginbotham is going to hold our gospel meeting. He's the preacher at the church there at Carnes, where this school is housed in a building they house out there. It's part of the work of the eldership and of that congregation to do that. And to hear those 2 of those 6 young men speak, it just meant so much to me. There is so much good going on that it is easy to be encouraged. And so look for that and be encouraged by this. Now, also today, and I wasn't able to get up there, but the church at Campaign had a homecoming day. And like a few years ago, we celebrated 100 years. This was their 100 years. I'd love to have been there with them. I think, though, about 100 years ago, who was that? I don't know who it was. They might know. But 100 years ago, someone went to that little community and said, we can meet together and worship the Lord and serve Him the way it talks about in the New Testament. And we don't have to be part of a denomination. And they took that message right there into Campaign, and for 100 years they've been doing that. That is just really tremendous to me. And I'll give credit to Jason Gann. Everybody in Campaign knows Jason Gann. Every year he visits every house to see if they'd like to study the Bible with him. Isn't that wonderful? So just hearing things like that is so encouraging. This week also begins a gospel meeting out at Bethany. Bill Watkins is going to be preaching there. He began today, and I think this goes through Wednesday. So either Monday night or Tuesday night, I kind of feel on how Laura and I are feeling, but we're going to try to get out there to one of those gospel meetings, and you do that if you can. It'll encourage you, and you will be an encouragement to them when you go. Just like when we have visitors here, doesn't it encourage us? And so we're going to have many more opportunities to do that as this year rolls around, and we'll try to be calling that to your attention. But now let me get to these tracts. One of them I find it very interesting. It's the first one up there called Festivals and Feasts of the Jews. Now, the Jews had a religious calendar, and there were certain days they were to observe throughout the year on that calendar. There's people today that think that the church needs a religious calendar. And the Roman Catholic Church has established one, and they have almost every Sunday is a special Sunday now dedicated to some saint as you go throughout the year and all. But on that religious calendar, I'd say the big day then is Easter. And they put that on a religious calendar for churches. And churches all over the place are going to make a special holy day out of Easter. And that we kind of know. We got a little precedent for Easter because Easter fell after the Passover. And the Jews, they know when the Passover was. And so we can say, well, the Sunday following the Passover week would be the Resurrection Sunday. Now, you notice Easter changes through the years. It doesn't fall on the same day every year. We usually have a holiday, and it's going to be that day. July 4th always falls on the same day of the calendar, doesn't it? But, that's Independence Day is what it is, but it's always July 4th. But now Easter will move around, and that's because the way the Jews determined their calendar. And it's difficult to decipher that out of the Old Testament, how God told them to do it. But it had to do with the motions of the stars and the positions of the moon. And we've got a little shortcut way of knowing when Easter begins. We'll say it's the first Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox. And most of the time that works. That's not exactly how it was done. Sometimes that does not work. One of the reasons it doesn't work is because of the 7-hour difference between us and Israel. And that their full moon might fall on one day and ours fall on another during that 7 hours, because the moon's only full really for just a moment in a 24-hour period, or really in a 29.5-day period. It's only full just a month, and it could fall on different days and throw things off a week or sometimes even a month. And that's one of the reasons, but that usually works. Well, the Jews had it in their calendar. They knew when to celebrate these feast days, and there's an official Jewish, I don't know what you call it, council or something, that determines this every year. And it's usually not too hard for them to do. They know how that does. It's interesting that the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church do not agree on the Christian days to celebrate that, though. Well, there is no Christian calendar in the New Testament. And so sometimes Easter may roll around, and we may not even make notice of it here in the church. We'll go right on through and we might have an Easter egg hunt or something, but anything going on in our worship, it may not even come up. Sometimes, though, we might have a sermon on the resurrection on Easter. I tell you, you don't have to do that, but it would be just as wrong to say you have to have a sermon on the resurrection every Easter as it would be to say you can't have a sermon on Easter Sunday on the resurrection. It's just another Sunday for us, and that's because we're trying to restore New Testament Christianity and abide by that, and not the way man has added things to it along the way. And so surely, I always think, surely there's a way to take advantage of the cultural interests in our teaching without adopting some special holy day and setting that aside. And sometime we'll do something like that. But I'm a little off. This talks about 7 feasts on this calendar. Now, it's got in the little circle here the months of our year: January, February, March, April, May. It goes on through that. But then it also lists on the outside of that, or on the inside of that in red, it has the Jewish months of the year. And I'm not going to try to pronounce them. They're pronounced different. And they don't exactly line up. In fact, on average, they fall about the middle of our month. So according to this one, then, the religious year would begin for the Jews about March 15th. It's not always but it'll rotate around that. They have a separate calendar. They have a religious calendar. They also have a civil calendar. Their civil calendar begins about September 15th. But that'll move about a little bit year by year. So when you're reading about the months in the Old Testament, you say, well, what month was that? What time of year would that be? You can take this little card and stick it in your Bible, and get a pretty good idea of about where that would fall through the year. So that's the information on this card. And then the feast that it mentions. There are 2 feasts in the Bible that are not mentioned on this calendar. These are the feasts here on this card that are mentioned in the law of Moses. Here they are. The Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Day of First Fruits, the Feast of Pentecost, the Day of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Well, the 3 main feasts would be the Passover, the Pentecost, and the Day of Atonement. But there are other feasts associated with those feasts, and so those feasts are outlined where you can read about them then in the Bible as well. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but think. Can you think of 2 feasts that were not mentioned? One of them's named in the Bible, the other's not named. One of them is found in the book of Esther. It's not in the law of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, not there. But at the last chapter of the book of Esther, the Feast of Purim that the Jews celebrate to this day. It's more like a civil feast than a religious feast. There's another one. And it's not named in the Bible, but it talks about Jesus going to the feast. And when you study the things around that in the book of John, what feast would that be? And most likely, it's the feast that today we call Hanukkah. Jesus going to Jerusalem at Hanukkah. Sometimes I tell people, that's the real Christmas story, is when Jesus comes to Jerusalem at Hanukkah. And so that's not named, but that seems to be what that feast was. And that was a feast the Jews were celebrating at the time of Jesus. So, little card about those feasts. Now, there's 2 cards here that follow that. I really like these cards. There's so much information on these. And both of these are about types and antitypes. You know what that is, a typewriter. Okay, you have the type on the key. Well, you may not know a typewriter. Kids, we used to have typewriters. Okay, it was a little thing, you punch a key and the key would come up and it had a letter on that and you had to change the ink ribbon and it would press that ink ribbon and it would send ink from that ribbon right onto a page. And every letter on that, we didn't have printers that printed it out for us. We would sit there and type and type. There was a way to do it with all your fingers, but I always did it with these 2. I did pat, 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 and boy, I'd type away. And then we'd hit the carriage return. I'll tell you that someday. But the type was on the little metal key, and it would hit the ink ribbon and leave a letter, an ink letter on the page, and that was the antitype. So that's the way the Bible is too. The Bible has types and antitypes. So this talks about, and the way they do this, they compare these men. Have you ever compared Adam to Christ? Well, there's a list of things where you can compare Adam and things we know about Adam and how he is a type of Christ, who's the final product here. And then on the back, it goes chronologically, Noah as a type of Christ. And then the next card going along, Melchizedek is a type of Christ, both a king and a priest, in a unique priesthood that had neither precedent nor anything that would follow after it, so also is the priesthood of Christ. And that's explained in the book of Hebrews. Well, it's on this card how Melchizedek is the type of Christ. The 4th one on here, Moses, is a type of Christ. You see, God told Moses, I will raise up a prophet like unto you. Unto him shall you hearken. And so it compares Moses in his life and the life of Christ. on here, on these little charts. So just a lot of information in these 3 little cards. Now, this next one, and I won't get through all of them. I'm not going to do all 32 cards. I'm just giving you a sample of what's up here. This is one called, Why Should I Study a Book of Jewish Mythology? Why should I study a book of Jewish mythology? And you know what they're talking about? When people say something like that, they're talking about the Bible usually. Is the Bible a book of mythology? Let me tell you what, there is Jewish mythology. And I've read some of that, and I read it cautiously. Our Lord warned us through the Holy Spirit to avoid Jewish fables. There are some today that seem like they're more interested in preaching Jewish fables than they are preaching the New Testament. And there's some really interesting ones. And while I say that, I may be guilty here. I learned a Jewish fable. And you can tell this fable, you can tell this can't be in the Bible when you hear it, but that there is Jewish mythology out there. And we went out there in the hills of Judea, and there's this fella, he built these lean-tos out of camel's hair and goat hair, and he stopped the bus, and he wanted to entertain us. And we got out of the bus and went down in and sat on his mats, and he came out and pretended he was Abraham. That's what, and he's going to show us hospitality. Now, he didn't kill the fatted calf, but he did give us some awful tasting coffee. And that was his hospitality. But he said, now, you don't know this story. And here's his little fable. When Abraham was a little boy in the Ur of the Chaldees, now see how you're already listening so good to Jewish fable. He said, Abraham, a little boy, and his father, Terah, made idols. And he had an idol shop. And Abram's being raised up in that idol shop. And Terah said, Abram, just a little fella, he said, Abram, I got to go take care of some business. Would you watch after these idols while I'm gone? Abram said he would. And after his daddy left, he saw this stick, and he was playing, and he broke one of those idols. Well, it just smashed to pieces. And it was so much fun, he went around breaking all those idols, just one after another, maybe like Edward, He was just breaking those idols and having so much fun. And then he realized, oh no, I broke all Daddy's idols. But he didn't break the great big idol that was out there in the middle. So what he did, he set the stick over by that big idol. And when Terah walked in, he said, Abram, what happened to these idols? Who broke these idols? And he pointed to the big idol with the stick and said, he did it. And that's the way Terah found out that there wasn't anything to idols. Well, those are the Jewish fables. You can tell that's not a Bible story, can't you? It doesn't even sound like Bible stories. I tell you, there's a great lesson to go over to that land and look at the land in the book. And you see through the years and across the land how the Bible stories fit right in on top of that book. And you can't do that with the Jewish fables. And so this is a little track about why the Bible is not a book of Jewish fables, but a record that has credibility and evidence for it and reliability. And one of the things it does here is, Jesus. Now, he rose from the dead. That gives him credibility. And Jesus accepted the books we have in the Old Testament. And he rejected these books of fables. He didn't bring those into it. He accepted the Old Testament record. What a strong confirmation of that Old Testament. So that's what this track is about. This second one is a little similar. The Jews' place in God's plan. More than once over there, I heard people saying things like, well, yes, God wants all the Jews to return here. Oh yeah, Jesus is coming back to Jerusalem, and he'll rule, and he'll rule through the Jews sometime. As though God still has a special plan. Now, he's got the gospel for all the world, but the Jews, now that's different, and he's going to treat them different than everyone else in the world. Now, that's not what the Bible teaches. But there was a time God had a special place for the Jews. They were different than all the other nations. And God used them in a special way. Here's some of the things. God chose Jesus, and he was a Jew. God chose Jewish men to be the apostles. God chose some of these others here. God chose the Jewish temple as his earthly home. God had used that nation of Jews to accomplish this plan we read about in the Bible and brought it to completion. And now, we're all children of God by faith, not by flesh. And so God's special use for the Jews is over. And they need to hear and believe and obey the gospel just like everyone else. Well, that's what this track is about. Here's one that it's a little different than maybe the title sounds. What should I teach my child about baptism? That's always a critical time when a child is coming of age, and how much, you know, it's possible for a child to understand the gospel and yet really not be mature enough to make a commitment to Christ. And that's such a precious period in the life of a child, and it's a time where parents are really concerned about their children through that period, and we don't always have real good answers for all the things that can come up there during that period. I thought that's what this tract was about, but it's not. It's really trying to explain baptism to little children. Little children. They don't need to be baptized yet, but we need to teach them. And so it's just a good in child talk. And when I thought about this, you know, if this would help children understand, it would help adults understand, wouldn't it? Here, let me read the little titles here, and you can just see teaching children this. So baptism is when God puts us in his bathtub. See, a little child, they could relate to that, getting in the bathtub. And then baptism is when you get out of trouble with God. Your children, they know God getting in trouble and then getting out of trouble. So baptism is when someone gets married to Jesus. Baptism is when God adopts you into his family. Children can understand that. Maybe we need to talk to grown-ups and explain it the way we explain it to children, because it makes it clear. Well, that's what the track is about. I'll do see if there's any I want to get right to here. Yeah, I'm going to do this one. I'm going to skip over to it. Appreciation of Bible teachers. Here's a track on appreciation of Bible teachers. Every good preacher should be, first, a Bible teacher. I don't really try to distinguish between preaching and teaching. If the sermon is not teaching the Bible, then what's the preacher doing? Well, you hear them, turn on the radio or watch them on TV. What are they doing? They can get people all fired up and get all kind of emotional response and tell personal testimonies about what God meant to them and how it felt. And they say all this stuff and they're not teaching the Bible. So you should expect a preacher primarily to be a Bible teacher. And he's doing it in this format. But we've got many other Bible teachers. And in our little classes, and in our Bible classes, and our Sunday school classes, we've got Bible teachers. I just am I don't remember the names of all my Bible teachers, but boy, I had some good ones that were really dedicated to teaching me the Bible as a little child. And then growing up through the years, going to Bible class. And so much of my foundational knowledge of the Bible, it didn't come from the sermons. I heard my father preach as much as it did those teachers. It could sit me around a little table and open up a little book and have me a little project and memorize these names and teach me the books of the Bible and know who the judges were and tell me those Bible stories and laid that foundation that has meant so much to me through the years. And sometimes I'm studying things and my mind goes back to one of those little classrooms. That's where I began the study of this subject and what I learned. And so this is just on appreciation of Bible teachers. And we got adult Bible teachers. And we're so thankful for them. There's so much occurs in a Bible class. And sometimes, it's easier, it is. It's easier to tune out during a sermon, isn't it? I mean, but when you're in a Bible class where somebody might call on you, you pay attention. It's just easier to pay attention in a Bible class than it is to sit and listen through a sermon sometime. Not that one's better than the other, but and so these Bible teachers we have, and we can all learn to be Bible teachers. We may not all feel like we can stand up and preach and all, but we can all learn to be Bible teachers. And if we can't teach a little class, we can teach someone. We'll be in a conversation and know your Bible and be able to teach it. And so a tract on that, and then following that in the lineup out there is also then, so let's beware of the danger of false teachers. We need to know our Bibles. We can't depend on preachers and teachers alone. We need to know our Bible. We need to be Bible students. And there was a time where members of the church were known for that. They knew their Bible. They knew we studied it. Everybody knew that. If you go to Church of Christ, well, they know their Bible. They'll say that. They may not agree with us, but they would confess. And it's because we didn't just study the Bible at church. We had Bibles at our bedsides. We had Bibles at our dinner tables. We had Bibles in our studies and in our cars. And we knew what the Bible said because we read it and we study it and we think about it and we meditate on it day and night. And we know that the authority for truth lies not in the preacher or the teacher. It lies in that book. And so we know the book. And that's what we depend on. I will have to say this. And I commend the members of the church that I know. Most of the time, members of the church do have good Bible knowledge. It is far superior to the knowledge that others have that go to denominations. And so members of the church generally have a much superior Bible knowledge. And we need to concentrate on that and focus on that so we'll know truth from error and we can be Bible teachers in ourselves and know that. So a couple of tracts on that. The other ones I have here, 3 first in Genesis. Genesis is a book of beginnings, a book of first. And this points out 3 of them. Of serpents and sin. The devil came into the garden as a serpent, and it discusses that. 14 chapters and no sins. Who do you think that's talking about? Where does the Bible spend 14 chapters talking about someone and never says they sinned? It's Joseph. Now, some might argue with that. Say, well, he was bragging to his brothers about his dreams and made them mad. Well, maybe. Maybe that's just kind of immaturity on his part. And then also, what's he doing making his brothers think that they'd stole the golden cup? Wasn't that deceptive? So it doesn't call it a sin, but there are some things you look at Joseph thinking, maybe he shouldn't have done that. But overall, Joseph is such an outstanding character of someone that did what was right in hard cases. So that's what this is about. How to be a leader in the church. Let me end with that one. There's one called The Sermon That Nearly Killed Jesus, and Where Would Jesus Worship, and 3 Attractions of the Cross and the Wondrous Cross. But let me talk about how to be a leader in the church. There's 2 kinds of leadership. There's positional leadership, and there is personal leadership. Now, your elders are in positions of leadership. And as such, they have authority because of their position. But more than that, if your elders are the kind of men they need to be, far greater than their positional leadership is their personal leadership, isn't it? They're just good men, and you trust them. And a good eldership does not usually have to resort to positional leadership. They will work with a congregation, and the church will know. Now, you know, we've got, like here, I hope you realize it, we got 3 good men, and they think this is what we ought to do. Let's do it. And the elders don't have to come up and say, we make a decree and we call the shots and this is how it's going to be. They don't have to do that because they realize, you know, our elders would like us to do this. That's enough. That's enough. And that kind of personal leadership does not just reside in an eldership. It resides in every man and woman in this room. You have great strength and potential in personal leadership without occupying any position. Should women be leaders in the church? Well, not positional leaders. But boy, women have led the church for years through personal leadership. Just because they're good, godly women, known for that. And we'll pick up on that, and we want to be better than we are because of them. And men that would never qualify to be an elder can have great personal leadership. You want to know how to be a leader in the church? Here's how you do it. You humble yourself before God. And you live a godly life in accordance with His will. And all who know you will know that's what you're doing. And you'll exert great influence in the Lord's church, greater than any position can ever give you. And so that's how to be a leader in the church. It's a little different tack maybe than maybe you thought of, but it's that personal leadership. Let me extend the invitation. I've talked a little longer than I wanted to. You need to be a member of the Lord's church. You need to be baptized into Christ. You need to live that life that He asked us to live and be faithful all our days until we can rejoice with Him in eternity forever. If you need to respond to the gospel tonight, you can do it as we stand and sing.